A tense standoff continues between police and pro-democracy protesters on the streets of Hong Kong this morning after clashes over the weekend. Hello and welcome to Mornings on ABC and ABC News 24. I'm Joe O'Brien. Our riot police in Hong Kong have fired volleys of tear gas at thousands of pro-democracy protesters who've brought parts of the city to a standstill. The demonstrators want China to scrap restrictions on the election of the territory's next leader in 2017. It's the worst unrest in the former British colony since China took back control 17 years ago. Some protesters erected barricades to block security forces amid chaotic scenes that are still unfolding. Hong Kong's leader is calling for calm.
It is important that we engage all parts of the community, including young students, in a rational manner. And insofar as consultations on the question of constitutional development is concerned, it is also important to bear in mind that we have to operate within the framework of the stipulations of the Basic Law and the National People's Congress Standing Committee's decisions, because these are the legal and constitutional frameworks for Hong Kong's constitutional developments to go forward in.
Protest organisers say even they're surprised by the number of people who've taken to the streets.
Yeah, the scale of today's occupation is beyond our expectations. You know, it's not just MOT, but Wan Chai, Central, we also occupy. I mean, part of the road occupies. And it's purely initiated by people themselves. It is not our operations. So people are really determined to fight for democracy and their own dignities. And it's very encouraging to us. But since this is such an impactful incident, particularly because of the tear gas, deployment, we need to sit down and review what happened today. And I guess it's time to ask the government to step down. I'm talking about CY Leung to step down. So I guess a week later, I hope that we can sit down to review the situation and then talk about our next step. In the coming few days, probably I will be arrested and detained for 48 hours or more. So I don't think we can handle any more occupation in the near futures.
Riot police in Hong Kong have fired volleys of tear gas and carried out baton charges to disperse pro-democracy protesters. It's the worst unrest in the former British colony since China took back control 17 years ago.
They call their movement Occupy Central with Love and Peace. This is Hong Kong Central, but there wasn't much love or peace. Riot police on the front line, but behind the smoke, an angry Beijing. They've been planning this for months. Supplies to fuel a sit-in that has no end date. They were ready for the tear gas.
We won't go home. We won't. Not only me, all of us here won't go home until victory lasts.
But there'll be no victory if the police have their way.
Why do you need to use tear gas? They're a peaceful crowd. Why do you need to use tear gas?
The more the tear gas, the more the defiance. Tens of thousands outside government headquarters. Police go on strike, they shouted. Lay down your weapons. We have no fear, he chants. Protect the people.
A few minutes ago, the tear gas canisters were going off here, and there's still a sting in the throat and in the eyes. But right now, an uneasy standoff between the riot police and the crowd. The only thing I would say is that the crowd seems to be getting, if anything, bigger and angrier. They're stretched all the way in that direction, thousands, and up the street there, on the cross streets and up on the walkways. No sign here that they are heeding the government appeal to go home.
In mainland China, police don't put up with scenes like this. But Beijing has promised to respect Hong Kong's way of life. And that makes them the only Chinese citizens with freedom of speech.
If we miss this chance to fight for ourselves, I think Hong Kong will have no future. That's why we are here.
It feels like a dangerous moment. Who's in charge? The Communist Party, which expects to choreograph all the political drama, or the demonstrators, who found a common voice and now intend to define their own destiny?
And more on these protests in Hong Kong over the weekend. There were some pretty dramatic shots of those clashes between protesters and police there. It's a live shot you can see there from Hong Kong. Now you can see those demonstrators still cutting off one of the main routes in Hong Kong. We'll be speaking to someone on the ground there in Kowloon in the next hour or so. Stick with us on ABC News 24.